Our last year's opening speaker at Why the World Needs Anthropologists in Tartu, Estonia, was Sten Tamkivi, the founder of Skype. And incidentally, we found out that his wife was an anthropologist. And this year's opening speaker is Benj Sykes.
Okay, so let's quickly clarify one thing. Benj, what did your wife study?
Yes, my wife is not only an anthropologist, but she's an alumnus of Durham Anthropology Department.
There we go.
So there must be some secret sauce behind the whole idea. And how do you get along with anthropologists, by the way?
Professionally, very well. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about the other side later in terms of technology and what that's doing to relationships and so on.
Yeah, but
very good, yes.
Because we're live streaming, you should say that.
Okay, excellent.
And Benj is, what is most important, Benj Sykes is the UK country manager and head of program asset management at Dong Energy's offshore wind power. And he has spent, or you have spent, the entire career in the energy sector. And today, you're with us to tell us that we can't solve the problems only with technologies, right?
Well, I'm hoping to get some answers from you all today. So whether you're here in the auditorium or on the live stream, I'm hoping you're going to answer my questions. I'm a geologist, actually, as John will know, but I definitely come from the technology side of the world. So I'm going to pose questions, and I'm hoping the anthropology community can answer them for me. So small challenge. Good.
Yeah. So
I'm all good to go.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for those introductions. That's been. Can you all hear me, by the way? I'm assuming. Well, I've got a mic on. I'm just hoping it's live. Am I? Yeah. Perfect. Good. So a little bit of background on me. My name's Benj Sykes. I work for Dong Energy. You've already heard the story about my anthropological links to Durham. I'm also on the advisory board of the Energy Institute that John spoke about earlier. By the way, where's John gone? I do love the idea of meeting outside the front of a circular building. I haven't quite figured out what that means, but I guess we may just be going around in circles trying to find the front of something that doesn't have one. But there we go. Hopefully we won't have a fire alarm. You'll also notice that I've been introduced as Benj Sykes of Dong Energy, and you won't see the name anywhere there. You'll see a name, a very good Danish name, Ørsted, and that's because the company I work for, Dong Energy, is about to change its name. We have for around 10 years been called Dong Energy. It's Danish for Danske Olie Naturgas, an oil and gas business. We are now moving away from that. We've just sold all our oil interests and all our gas interests. So we are now too green for our name. So we're changing it to Ørsted. And I'm sure you will all know that Hans Christian Ørsted was the 18th century Danish scientist who discovered the connection between magnetism and electricity, which of course forms the basis of all power generation around the globe today. So a very apt name for us to adopt as a Danish energy company. Our mission is to drive the energy transition, so powering the planet, but powering the planet with clean energy, something we believe is entirely achievable without the need for fossil fuels. We can debate that later. What I'd like to do is give you a bit of an introduction to the business that I'm in. Then I'd like to talk a bit more widely about the energy system, and then pose some questions. As I said at the beginning, I'd really like to hear your views on some of the challenges that we face. The reason I'm involved in the Energy Institute is I believe passionately that we can't make this transition to a clean society, to a clean energy system in the UK, in Europe and globally if we just take a technological approach. So to have so many of you in the room today being able to challenge the human aspects of that transition is going to be extremely interesting for me. And I'm hoping that this discipline and this interdisciplinary engagement will help us, not just as a business, but as a sector, to make that transition effectively, quickly, and affordably. So who are we? Well, as I said, we used to be called Dong Energy. We are in the process of sloughing off that old name and becoming Ørsted. We have three main businesses. As you heard, I am looking after the offshore wind part of Dong Energy's business, or Ørsted's business in the UK, even I've not got used to it yet. And that's around 80% of our business, but we do have other businesses as well. We are also converting our fleet of coal-fired power stations to biomass. So we're the world leader in the transformation of coal-fired power stations to biomass. That raises some very interesting questions about sustainability, about supply chains, about transport and so on. And thirdly, we have a utility business. We sell power and gas. And we do continue to sell gas even though we don't produce it anymore. And interestingly, that business is all about helping our consumers, our customers, to use less power and use less gas, which seems a bit counterintuitive and perhaps something to talk about later, but absolutely our driver is to reduce consumption in that business whilst remaining profitable. Some of you will be able to see on this map, this is just a footprint of our business around the globe. We're principally in Northwest Europe. All these little windmills, or wind turbines as we prefer to call them, represent individual wind farms that we've built around the coasts of Northwest European countries. Principally Denmark, of course, but also Germany. We've got a large fleet there. And our biggest market, the UK. We're the world leader in offshore wind. We've been doing it for about, well, 25 years, actually, in various guises. We've just taken down our very first wind farm. I'll talk about that a bit later. And we're something like 1/3 of the global market in offshore wind. So very much the £900 gorilla in this game. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're doing all of this energy transition. Why are we making this move? Well, I'm not going to debate climate change this afternoon. I think I'm hoping we're past that. I don't know how many people in the room today, let's say it's 100, only 3 of you should be debating whether climate change is a real issue and whether climate change is something that's man-made and therefore we need to do something about. I'm hoping that's yesterday's story. But that transition to a clean energy system has its challenges, and many of you will know the energy trilemma, but just for those of you that don't, it's the 3 factors working in tension. One is driving carbon out of the energy system. We burn coal, we burn gas, we burn oil. We've got to get away from that and find clean ways of producing electricity, and indeed heat and transport need to take carbon out as well. But we need to do it affordably, and most importantly of all, certainly for politicians these days, we need to do it in a way that makes sure the lights don't go out. So we've got to tackle carbon, cost, and keeping the lights on. And if we miss any one of those, we will have failed. Just stepping back a little bit about this transition, I'm sure you will all know about the Industrial Revolution. In researching for this talk today, I've been learning that, in fact, we're in the 4th Industrial Revolution. And did anybody know that? Maybe you all know that as anthropologists. But for me, that was quite a revelation. So, first Industrial Revolution in the 18th century with the move from rural to more urban settings and the start of industrialization. Then we get the Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th, early 20th century, where electricity starts to come around. We start to see mass production. And then, of course, in the last 50 years, we've seen the Third Industrial Revolution with the arrival of the internet. And now the 4th one, which is big data, to put it in its simplest terms. And this 4th Industrial Revolution very closely links into this energy transition. And for me, the question is, how do we do this transition in a way that is sustainable and that takes societies, takes everybody with us? Because I have seen engineers trying very hard to do things that make absolute sense from a technology perspective, but go absolutely nowhere. Most of you are probably too young to remember an incident that Shell had back in the 1990s, I think it was. There was an offshore oil structure called Brents Spar. Does anyone know what Brents Spar is? Anyone heard of it? A few people? So this was a big oil storage tanker that was floating out in the northern North Sea. Shell did masses, I was working for Shell, by the way, at the time, did masses of research and said, do you know what, the best way of getting rid of this is to take it out in the middle of the Atlantic and sink it. It's safer, it's clean because there's not much in it, and it's cost effective. Made absolute sense from all those perspectives. Greenpeace didn't agree. Greenpeace decided that that was not a great precedent to set, that you just throw your rubbish in the sea. So they challenged it, and they made up their facts. They made up the numbers. They were quite open about the fact afterwards that they had used numbers that weren't verified, to put it politely. And they won that battle. Brents Spar was not sunk in the middle of the Atlantic. It was taken to Norway and chopped up into bits and recycled. And that, for me, was a really important moment in my learning, that you might have all the facts, but if you don't take people with you, if you don't engage with people in a way that is meaningful for them, the facts are irrelevant. I'm not going to start talking about whether we live in a post-truth world, and I'm certainly not going to talk about what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, but for me, these are really important factors, and I hope we can talk about them today. Just coming back to offshore wind, though. The energy transition is well underway. The reason I put this graph up is for a couple of things. Firstly, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to offshore wind, so bear with me. What you can see here is the rapid increase in the amount of offshore wind that's being built around the world. And you can see from 2012 out to roughly where we are, it's gone up about 5 or 6-fold, which is pretty extraordinary in terms of growth. But the other thing you'll see, where you maybe won't see, but I can tell you, is that as of today, the amount of offshore wind that's been deployed in the world is about 1/5 of the generating capacity of just the UK. So it's very niche at the moment. Onshore wind, solar PV are the big players in renewables at the moment, but offshore wind is coming fast. And let me tell you why. Offshore wind is a relatively young technology. As I say, we built our first wind farm 25 years ago, but it really only took off maybe 10, 12 years ago in terms of scale. And extraordinary things have been happening in this industry. So I'm going to be a bit geeky for a moment. We use very, very big ships to build these now. These were never even dreamt of even 5 years ago. So this is a ship that's jacked itself up out of the sea. It's about 250 meters long and about 60 meters wide. So it's not a small thing. And basically it builds those things, puts everything onto the foundation out at sea. And we've also found smarter ways of running these wind farms. All of this is driving costs down, making this a more affordable transition, hence the 50% off. This was a campaign that we and others ran earlier this month, actually, to celebrate the fact that the cost of offshore wind has fallen by 50% in 2 years, which is a claim that not many technologies can make. Even fast-moving consumer goods don't come down in cost that quickly. Anyone who's bought a TV will know that. But the biggest thing that's driving this is the fact that our turbines just keep on getting bigger and bigger. So that wind farm I mentioned at the beginning, it's called Renewables. It's in Denmark. We've just taken it down after 25 years, had 11 turbines. One of these turbines that we've just put up in Liverpool Bay, on the west coast of the UK, one of those turbines has more generating capacity than the whole of that original wind farm. This thing is about 200 meters tall. It has a rotor area considerably bigger than the London Eye. Sorry, it's a bit UK-centric, but hopefully most of you know the London Eye. And one rotation of the blades on one turbine will power a home for more than 24 hours. So, by the way, each blade is 80 meters long. These are not things that you see being transported around the roads of the UK or indeed any other country. They are way too big. They're built at the coast and taken straight out on these massive ships. But this is enabling us to drive costs down, and this means that offshore wind is going to be rolled out faster than anyone had envisaged, even a year ago. How am I doing for time? I'm all right at the moment. Good. And again, to put things in context, to put this transition into context, what you see here, never mind about the detail, this pink line, what this pink line is showing you is the rate at which renewables start to dominate. This is the UK, but this is a good proxy for any OECD country, by the way. You can see that by 2040, which in my world is not very far away, I might be retired by then, but in terms of my business, we are building wind farms that will be running out in the 2030s, 2040s. So this isn't very far away, where we'll see more than half of our electricity in the UK coming from renewable energy. And indeed, half of it could be coming just from offshore wind, given the scale and the low cost that offshore wind now offers. But this creates some real challenges for us as an industry and for us as a society. Principally, I think, because the kind of electricity you get from renewables can't be turned on and off. Well, it can be turned off, but it can't be turned on when you want it. If you want more solar-powered electricity and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're out of luck. If you want more wind power and the wind's not blowing, you're out of luck. So this is going to drive a whole load of changes in how we consume electricity, not only how we generate it. And that's really what I want to talk about now. This is I borrowed this from KPMG. This is really just an illustration of the interconnectedness of the world that we're going to be living in. I'm not going to go piece by piece through it, but it's really just to show we have some big questions to answer about how all these bits fit together and how we as people, as humans, as societies and as a culture, how do we actually interact with this? Because it's going to be very different to how we've lived our lives up until now, and the world is going to look very different for all of us. I'll come on to that in a minute, but it's worth noticing, for example, you know, you've still got some old power stations. We intend to get rid of those, by the way. You've got offshore wind, you've got cities, you've got rural communities, perhaps generating their own power. You've got all the aspects of transport, which I'll come on to. So a very interconnected world, and one where interaction between people and energy and interaction between people and other people in relation to energy becomes much more significant than perhaps it has been in the past. So this is really just to illustrate the level of complexity and interconnectedness that we're going to have to deal with in this new world. Just going to touch a little bit to start with on the connected home. Does anyone here have a smart meter installed? Okay, there's a few people. Very good. I've got one as well. Haven't figured out what to do with it yet, but it looks nice and apparently means I don't need to send meter readings off. Anyone here got a Hive or any sort of internet-controlled heating systems? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, not many. So this is coming fast, and this conference in 10 years' time, every hand will go up. I can pretty much guarantee we will all be using much smarter systems. But that has a lot of implications, which I think we need to explore. And they're not implications about the technology either, they're implications about the people using the technology. And it's not just about electricity, it's about heat, it's about transport as well. Anyone heard of smart appliances? You know about washing machines that run themselves when they decide it's a good time to run? You know about freezers that turn themselves off because the electricity price has peaked for half an hour? Seems like a great idea. Not everybody thinks so. And I think if we are going to manage a world where electricity is not available necessarily when we want it, and we consume it when it's available, not when we need it, we've got to learn how do we start behaving differently? How do we get comfortable with the idea that our washing machine decides when to wash our clothes, our freezer decides when it's going to get colder, and so on. I think these are questions that we're only really starting to think about as an energy industry, and that's really why I'm here today, because you guys clearly are going to have all the answers to this and help us do this. I talked a little bit, I was asked at the beginning about how I get on with my anthropologist wife. Well, one of her jokes is the fact that she thinks I'm more married every day to Alexa and slightly less married to her. And there's a genuine question is, what does artificial intelligence, it's not very intelligent yet, but it's becoming more intelligent, what does that mean for how we consume energy, how we live as people, how do we interact as people? Not only Alexa, but, you know, am I going to, rather than go down the pub, am I just going to spend the evening with Siri? I kind of hope not, but I don't think Siri wants that either. Another aspect that's quite challenging for this energy transition is transport. Now, has anyone here got an electric car? Oh, we have a few electric cars, fantastic. Suffering from range anxiety at all? No? No? Yes? Yeah. It's very interesting. The reason I wanted to talk about that is because one of the big barriers to the energy transition is getting people, you, me, whoever, to adopt new technology that might be great at a societal level, great at a community level, but maybe not so great for us as individuals. And a good example from not this decade, but previous decades is the change in use of light bulbs. Not that long ago, we all used incandescent light bulbs. They're brilliant. You turn them on, the light's there straight away. Nowadays, with low energy light bulbs, you turn them on, their light's there straight away. But that wasn't the case when they started rolling out low energy light bulbs. They were hopeless, to be honest. You turn them on and then you leave the room and come back 15 minutes later and it might have actually started shedding enough light for you to see what you're doing. And that's for me, a good example. We have more technologies coming that won't be perfect, but we need to get people to adopt them. And how do we do that? How do we get people comfortable with the idea that they're going to take stuff which is very important for society? Electric vehicles is another example. We need to clean up the air, not only reduce CO2 emissions, but also all the pollutants that are causing such problems in cities such as London, Beijing and elsewhere. This isn't an easy question, but we have to find ways to, I'm not going to talk about nudge, but we need to nudge people in ever smarter ways to get them to adopt these technologies. Otherwise, we will be too late with this transition. Another interesting question about electric vehicles is, I guess those of you who have EVs will know how long it takes to charge your vehicle. It can take several hours, 9 hours if you're just using a normal plug. Imagine a world where you park your car, you plug it in, and the car decides whether it's going to charge or not because it's read your Google Calendar. It knows what your plans are for the next day. This is coming, believe me, this is coming. It's already being talked about by smart technology developers. Your car will decide, firstly, do I need to charge? Secondly, do I need to charge now? What's the price of electricity? How much time do I need to be charging? When's going to be the cheapest time to do it? How much does my owner want to use this car in the next 24 hours with a bit of margin for error? Oh, and by the way, if electricity is really expensive, maybe I could sell the electricity back out of the battery and back into the grid. And so your car may actually have been discharged overnight if you haven't told it you're going to need it in the morning. These are changes that are coming, and we need to figure out how do we get comfortable. There's another question about the data that we all are going to have to make available for this to work. I'll come back to that in a minute. Just a little bit about the system. I've talked about what happens in the home, I've talked about transport, talked a little bit about power generation, but as I mentioned with EVs, we're moving to a world where we don't have this old paradigm of big power stations, big wires that bring electricity to your home and you use it. We aren't just going to be consumers, and I hate this word, but we're going to be prosumers as well. So we're going to be producing as well as consuming power, whether it's selling electricity from our EVs, whether we're going to have batteries in our homes, whether we're going to have solar panels. I don't think anyone's going to have a 200-metre turbine in their garden, but there are other ways that we can do power generation. Another aspect that's very important in relation to network is heat. One of the biggest challenges for decarbonising society is not actually power generation, it's not transport, it's how do we heat our homes in a low carbon way. And of course, one of the solutions to that is going for heat networks. Well, the company I work for is based in Denmark, that's quite a normal thing. But it's a big change for people to decide that they are going to share their heating system with others. And they won't be in control of their heating system any more than they're in control of their washing machine or their freezer. So you're moving very quickly to a world where the Englishman's home is his castle, as we say. Once you're in your home, everything happens on your terms, you decide what happens when. To a world where, to be frank, we will just take what we're given and give what we can, and we will not be in control. We might think we are, but we won't be. It sounds a bit big brotherish, doesn't it? But how we get there and what this means for society, I'm kind of hoping you guys will answer for me. And just very lastly, to talk about data, big data. Data is something that's all around us, more and more data, and this isn't anything particularly insightful, but it's something we mustn't forget about. Whose data are we talking about here? I've already mentioned about your Google Calendar telling your car whether it should charge or not, but there's a whole load more data. You may have noticed on this picture, the chap in the top right-hand corner. I remember someone speaking about, he worked for a delivery company, it might have been FedEx, saying how brilliant it is when we've got smart meters, because with smart meters you can see if someone's at home, because you can look at the patterns of consumption. And by the way, you can now not only tell if someone's at home, but you can tell whether they're turning on their hairdryer or their hair curlers or their washing machine, because the profile of consumption is very slightly different. So you can read an immense amount of information about what's going on in someone's home just from the way they're consuming electricity. And more importantly, they can tell when you're not at home, which the delivery van guy thought was a brilliant idea. It could be put to more nefarious uses, of course. So I think the whole question of big data, how do we get comfortable with data, who owns this data, and to what extent do we want to open ourselves up to the world of data being used for good or ill? I think it's a big question that we have to figure out if this transition is going to happen. So I'm going to stop there, just maybe with a few questions. We're on a journey. Ørsted is doing its bit. We hope we're going to lead that transition. But we kind of need to know a lot more about how energy meets people and how people meet energy and how those all work together. So, yeah, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on exactly what we should do, not just on the technology side, but on energy and society to make this shift to a clean world happen safely, affordably and happily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benj Sykes from Donk Energy, now Ørsted, for this fascinating presentation. Some big ideas about the big data, about the big challenges of the future, and big questions. And this is time for the big questions. Who has the biggest questions in the audience?
Hello, Ricky Ork from Anthropology in Denmark. I think one answer to this question may be to involve the community in owning the energy. So if you kind of own and you are part of an ownership, for instance, the energy island of Samsø, which is an example of a community who got together and invested in the windmill, and then they tied the social bond, and now they can invest in all sorts of things, slaughteries and golf mining with no usage of how do you say, when they do it green, even the green field in the Gulf, because they are on a quest together. So perhaps for you as a big Ørsted international company, how you could address this cultural mindset by making it kind of from bottom up instead of top down.
I love the idea of community ownership, and one of the things that I guess I've learned over the years, and I've spent a bit of time talking in the US as well about low carbon transition. Different countries, different societies, different cultures see this very differently. Community ownership works really well in Denmark. It works a little bit less well in the UK. It's very challenging. The whole terminology and the whole, if you like, the mindset that drives this transition is different from place to place. But I think you're right. We have to engage people in this journey, and certainly community ownership of assets is one aspect of that.
Okay, do you have one more question? Yeah.
Thanks. Andrew Crossland, I work at Solar Century, so we're similar mindsets to yourselves. Yes. I really understand how this can work, and I'm obviously very passionate about it in terms of selling stuff, but there's a real worry in my head about leaving people behind. If we're trying to build a system that needs everyone to engage with it, because as we found with recent referendums, not everyone agrees with each other and necessarily does the rational thing, and what we think is rational. So are we risking here trying to design something that requires 100% participation?
That's a really good question. I think
Thank you.
a lot more engagement than we see, and a lot more engagement than we figured out how to achieve. Hence this conversation now. I think there's no way. By the way, just to be clear, when we talk about engagement and this transition, we need to remember there's 1.4 billion people in the world who don't have any electricity, smart or otherwise. So, there's another much bigger question about how does the rest of the world come on this journey. But in terms of the UK, in terms of Europe and OECD countries, I don't know. I don't think there's an answer that doesn't take people with us. I don't think you can have a transformed energy system that still has consumers just flicking the light on and being in complete control. It simply can't happen.
See why it worries me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So any other question from the audience?
Hi, my name is Mun. I'm a freelance researcher and an anthropologist. You've talked a little bit about the statistics and the data, big data on production of energy, but could you tell us a little bit about what's happening on the consumption side?
Just unpack that a little bit in terms of what sort of measuring people's consumption, or
I'm just curious.
Megawatts? Are you thinking about reducing demand?
I'm just curious about the demand. I'm just curious about the demand over time in the
So demand overall is dropping despite economic growth in countries like the UK. But I think, you know, we do need to find ways to use less electricity, but I think a lot of that will become economically sensible for people to do. I think the big challenge, though, is more about how we consume it rather than how much we consume. We do need to consume less electricity. We're on that journey, and I think that's a successful journey to the extent it's made progress so far. There's a lot more to do. But for me, the bigger question is not so much how much we use, but when and how we use it.
Thank you very much. I think this was a great conclusion, actually, of your speech. And please, one big round of applause for Benj Sykes.